Hello, and welcome to the Confidence and Beauty Summit, real root cause resolutions that reverse women's hair loss naturally. I am your host, Surreal Vasquez, a multi-certified functional medicine practitioner that is obsessed with reversing hair loss naturally. And as the CEO and founder of Volcanics, we bring you this summit to share our vision of a world where hopeless hair loss is a thing of the past, and every woman has the opportunity to break through her limiting beliefs while embodying a new truth that will set her free. And that truth is hair loss is reversible. Today, I am welcoming Dr. Tom O'Brien. Hi, Dr. Tom.
Hello, hello.
Dr. Tom O'Brien is considered a Sherlock Holmes of chronic diseases and teaches that recognizing and addressing the underlying mechanisms that activate an immune response is the map to the highway towards better health. He holds teaching faculty positions with the Institute for Functional Medicine and the National University of Health Sciences. He has trained and certified tens of thousands of practitioners around the world in advanced understanding of the impact of wheat sensitivity and the development of individual autoimmune diseases. I am so happy that you're here on this talk with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And one of the reasons I brought you on, Dr. Tom, it's because, you've been a personal role model for me. I've watched you for years. I've taken copious notes on every single talk I've seen you on. And like I told you before we started all of this, I've bought plants in my home because of you. Like I've made changes to my Tupperware because of you. And even with my diet, because you made such an impact in the world speaking about gluten sensitivity and the ramifications of not being aware of that and making choices that reflect that, oh my gosh, gluten can be a huge problem in you. And so I noticed that when I really limited or in some periodic times actually removed completely gluten, my health was just incredible and my hair as well. And so I have this 21-day challenge that I do with my community where we don't do sugar, gluten, dairy, corn, or rice. And gluten is one of those foods because of what I've learned from you. And the things that I see, it's like ring fingers that could barely move the ring because the finger was so inflamed, like that changes, so inflammation goes down, hair shedding stops. So can you start off our conversation talking about gluten and hair loss and why there is such a strong correlation between gluten exposure and hair loss and thinning, and what are some things that people can notice when it comes to eating gluten besides their hair that shows them they have a problem with it?
Sure. So the first place to start is to understand Center for Disease Control tells us 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. It's always inflammation. Everything except unintentional injuries, like an accident. Everything else is an inflammatory disease. Now, what does that mean? It means your immune system's gotten activated, producing inflammation. Okay, why does my immune system get activated? Because your immune system is the armed forces in your body, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard. We call them IgA, IgG, IgE, IgM, cytokines, but they're just branches of the armed forces trying to protect you. Okay, so wait a minute. So my immune system gets activated and produces the inflammation that is the trigger for every degenerative disease. Yes. Well, that sounds too simple. My first mentor would say the body is simply intricate and intricately simple. This is a basic 101 concept. You want to be healthy for a lifetime? This is basic 101. Understand how your current lifestyle is generating inflammation and how do I reduce that inflammation? Do I have inflammation right now? And how do I reduce it? And to your question about gluten, unfortunately, every human, when they eat wheat, they get a transient leaky gut. Every human, and gluten is a protein in wheat. Why? Why does that happen? You have sentries standing guard inside the small intestine. I like to think of the soldiers at Buckingham Palace, those guys with the big hats, you know. They're dormant. They don't move, but do not mess with those guys. So you've got sentries inside your gut that are dormant. They're just watching everything that comes out of the stomach into the first part of the intestines. Now you have the same body as your ancestors thousands of years ago, the same kidneys, the same gut, the same liver, the same immune system. And your ancestors before agriculture, so before 10,000 years ago, your ancestors were nomads. They followed the herd. They were always following herds, looking for food. That was the number one concern was food. They'd find something, they'd pick it up. First, they smell it, then they nibble at it, then they eat it. And if there was something toxic in there that they didn't identify, the acid in your stomach should kill it. But if it doesn't, as it comes out of the stomach into the first part of the intestine, because now it can get into the body, into the bloodstream from the intestines, as it comes in first part of the intestines, the sentries standing guard are watching everything that comes out of the stomach. And if they see a bug, they get activated immediately to do two things. First, create leaky gut. Why? Because when the cells open up a little bit, water from the body comes into the gut and it washes out the bug with the poop. That's what leaky gut is for. Leaky gut's not bad for you. It saves your life. Excessive leaky gut is bad for you. That's the difference.
Mm.
So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is that it activates the major amplifier of inflammation. Say, we got a bug here. Kill it, kill it, kill it. So that amplifier of inflammation, it's called NF-kappa B, it's the desk sergeant at the police station. You guys, you go to this neighborhood today. You guys, you go over here. IL 10, you go over to this neighborhood. NF-kappa B, you're over here. So the desk sergeant tells all of the different branches of the immune system in your gut what to do and where to go. So those two things happen. First, you get leaky gut within 5 minutes to wash out the bug with the poop. And second, you create more inflammation inside your gut to kill the bug. The problem is that the way that the sentry standing guard recognizes the threat, it looks at the amino acid structure and say, hey, that's a bug. That's a bug. We got to fight that. And the problem is that no human can digest wheat completely. And it gets digested, it gets broken down into little parts, but not completely. Think of a pearl necklace. Acid undoes the clasp of the pearl necklace. Now you have a string of pearls. And your enzymes act as scissors to cut that pearl necklace smaller and smaller. Snip, 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 snip. Until you're down to each pearl of the pearl necklace. We call that an amino acid. And those get absorbed right into your bloodstream. The problem is that no human can break down the pearl necklace of protein in wheat into each pearl of the pearl necklace. The best we can do is to break it up into clumps of pearl necklaces. No human has the enzymes to do that. And so the result of that clump of the protein from wheat is that the sentry standing guard looks at that, says, that's a bug. That looks like a bug. And so it gets activated to save your life. Its job is to save your life. Now, your ancestors who didn't have good sentry standing guard, they're called toll-like receptors, didn't have good toll-like receptors, they died. They died, and they did not reproduce. All of us are here today because our ancestors had very good toll-like receptor function to identify a bug and kill the bug. Wheat looks like a bug to the sentry standing guard in your gut. So every human gets this reaction when they eat wheat.
I'm sure that maybe the majority of people, unless they've heard you speak before, that are watching this had no idea that that was the case. And a lot of times they don't even understand that some of these symptoms in relationship to food do not look like bloat or constipation necessarily, but it could be maybe your sinuses are reacting because you're creating more mucus. Maybe your, like I said before, your ring on your ring finger is super tight, but it's because there's swelling and there's inflammation. And so they're just completely unaware of the fact that every time they're consuming gluten, the body is looking at that gluten not as food, but as a pathogen invader, something that needs to be that is merited of an inflammatory response. And if you continue to do that over and over again, now you have a situation where you're consistently inflamed and your gut becomes more and more permeable, more and more leaky. And now you have this chronic inflammation state, which is a trigger for something more serious like autoimmune conditions, because you mentioned in the beginning that inflammatory markers and inflammation is, the premise of disease.
That's exactly right. Really good summary. You pull at a chain, it always breaks at the weakest link. It's at one end, the middle, the other end. It's your heart, your brain, your liver, your kidney. It doesn't matter. The pull on the chain is inflammation. And wherever your weak link is, that's where it's going to break. I'll give you one example. Children diagnosed with drug-resistant epilepsy, which means that they've tried 3 medications and they're still having seizures. They're drug resistant. Children with drug-resistant epilepsy, 50% of them go into complete remission on a gluten-free diet. 50%. Now, why don't neurologists know this? Because this paper was written in a gastroenterology journal, and neurologists don't read gastroenterology journals. They read gastroenterology journals. They don't read neurology journals. They don't know. They don't know. But so it could be seizures. It could be joint pain. It could be psoriasis. It could be bad breath. It could be brain fog. It could be depression. It just depends on where the weak link is, where it's going to manifest. It's the pull on the chain, the inflammation that's the problem. And gluten, wheat, is gasoline on the fire.
Hmm. What are your thoughts on corn and rice? Because I've heard Dr. Peter Osborne speak about from the Gluten Free Society that corn and rice also have a type of gluten in it. And I noticed that when I take my clients and myself off of corn and rice, the results are much more prevalent. The experience is much better than if we had that as a substitution of a gluten-free lifestyle.
Right, right. And that's true. 50% of celiacs have a sensitivity to corn. 50% of them where the immune system's fighting corn, any corn at all. Uh, and with corn and rice, it's the lectin content in these grains that's the problem. So a good percentage of people have a problem with lectins in general. And so for those people, it's always, we start people gluten-free. And if they're not feeling better within a couple of weeks, then we take out corn, rice. And if they're not better in another couple of weeks, then we take out oatmeal. So we do it in stages to try to keep as much of the foods that they're familiar with as possible until they notice they're feeling a lot better.
Awesome. And besides the inflammatory component to gluten sensitivity, is there any other way that we can trace back gluten to hair loss, or is that really like the biggest thing that we need to focus on? It makes you chronically inflamed and it causes leaky gut.
Oh, it's the leaky gut, because the leaky gut is the gateway in the development of autoimmune diseases, the weak link in the chain. Uh, Alessio Fasano is at Harvard, and he's a professor of medicine, Harvard Medical School, professor of nutrition, Harvard School of Public Health, the chief of pediatric gastroenterology at Mass General at Harvard, the director of the Celiac Center at Harvard, the director of Mucosal Immunology Center at Harvard. The guy's got 5 titles. Any one title is a lifelong dream for someone at the top of their game. He's got 5. We think he'll win the Nobel Prize because him and his team are the ones that identified leaky gut, how it happens and why it happens. And they've been writing about it for 25 years now, actually almost 30 years now. And Fasano tells us he describes the perfect storm. And if your listeners get this, they understand for a lifetime how to stay healthier. The perfect storm in the development of chronic inflammatory diseases. And once again, 14 of the 15 top causes of death are chronic inflammatory diseases. This is the perfect storm that causes chronic inflammatory diseases. First, your genetics. Can't do anything about genetics. That's a deck of cards you were dealt. So the way you think about genetics is that they operate on dimmer switches. They don't operate on on-off switches. They operate on dimmer switches. And you want to dim down the genes of inflammation and turn up the genes of anti-inflammation. For example, 1 cup of blueberries a day for 3 years, and your brain's working as well as it was 13 years earlier. Just read the science, So blueberries turn down the genes of inflammation and turn up the genes of anti-inflammation. Okay, so that's your genes. Number two, who's got their hands on the dimmer switch? Environmental triggers. What does that mean? Well, it means the air you're breathing, the food you're eating, the water you're drinking, the emotional hormones you're producing, the stress hormones. Those are all environmental triggers in your body that turn up your genes or turn down your genes. Number three, when you've got too many inflammatory genes turned on because the environmental triggers are causing this inflammation, you create this thing in your gut called dysbiosis. Too many bad guys, not enough good guys. And when you have too many bad guys, that's number three, in your gut, it creates the leaky gut. That's number four. What's the leaky gut? Mrs. Patient, your digestive tract is a tube. It goes from the mouth to the other end, one big long tube. The inside of the tube is lined with cheesecloth. So when you eat food, like you take a bite of a hamburger, chew it 3, 4 times and gulp it down, that meat can't get into your bloodstream. It'd kill you if it got into your bloodstream. It's got to be broken down like the pearl necklace that I talked about earlier. Snip, 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 snip. Your foods have to be broken down until they're down to each pearl of the pearl necklace that goes right through the cheesecloth into the bloodstream. That's how it's supposed to happen. But when you have a leaky gut, because you got too many bad guys in the gut, not enough good guys, when you have a leaky gut, you tear the cheesecloth. When you tear the cheesecloth, now bigger clumps of food called macromolecules get into the bloodstream before they're supposed to. They're supposed to be going further down the digestive tract to be snipped smaller, but these macromolecules get in through the tears in the cheesecloth, the leaky gut, and now they're in the bloodstream, and your bloodstream's just a highway. It's lots of traffic on the highway, but it's just a highway. And now you've got these macromolecules in your bloodstream because of number four, the leaky gut. Now your immune system says, whoa, what is that? I better fight that. And now you make inflammation to fight these macromolecules. The systemic bloodstream is carrying this inflammation through your whole body, pulling on the chain, and wherever your weak link is, that's the symptoms you get. It doesn't matter if it's hair loss or seizures or joint pain or psoriasis. It doesn't matter. The mechanism, the perfect storm in the development of disease is this 5-part process. 95% of everyone will have a long, happy life if they understand this perfect storm and allocate their attention to making sure that they've got a healthy gut and they don't have leaky gut. 95% of the world would be happy and live a long and fruitful life if they understand the perfect storm.
So I always thought the perfect storm had three components, but you're saying there's five. So I thought it
There's
was
five now. Yeah, it was three a number of years ago.
okay. So it's leaky gut, which is gut permeability, the genetic predisposition, gut dysbiosis, and then what were you saying were the other two?
Environmental triggers that
Oh, of course.
activate your genes,
Mhm.
and then the systemic inflammation.
Right. Okay. So the systemic inflammation, they're giving it its own category, even though that's the result of leaky gut. And then environmental triggers are what turn on
Well,
epigenetics, right?
leaky gut is just the tears in the cheesecloth. That's all that is.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, but when the macromolecules get through, now you activate the immune system trying to protect you. Now it's just trying to protect you. So that's a separate mechanism that's going on. And people take anti-inflammatories to calm down the inflammation, which is okay, but that's not going to fix anything. That's going to put a damper on it for a little bit, but you've got to stop the tears in the cheesecloth, allowing the macromolecules to get into the bloodstream.
I found a study that insurance companies where they were looking at twins, identical twins,
Yes,
and whether or not they both developed the same diseases later on in life. And
yes.
the one thing that was most common was the environmental exposures that each twin was exposed to. And that was indicative of whether or not they developed that genetic trait that they had, whether it be type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure or an autoimmune condition. So I see that. I see that as being, I'm glad they're putting that into now what we call the autoimmune pentagon. We went from the trifecta to the pentagon. But that's great. That's amazing that people are bringing awareness to that. And so my next question would be about you talked about how this is all contributing to autoimmunity, whether it be hair loss or whether it be whatever else you're genetically susceptible to. Does that mean that you believe hair loss is an autoimmune symptom if it happens prematurely or it's happening outside of the normal cadence of hair shedding because the body is attacking the hair follicle? So are you saying that does that have to be just autoimmune, what we typically label as autoimmune hair loss, such as alopecia areata or alopecia universalis? Or are you saying that if there's scar tissue around the hair follicle due to inflammation, right? Because there wouldn't be scar tissue if there isn't inflammation. Can that be considered also somewhat autoimmune in nature?
Oh, yes, 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 of course. Yeah. Uh, the the symptom pattern of hair loss is an immune mechanism, usually an autoimmune mechanism. Every time, every time. And so the question you have to ask is, how am I throwing gasoline on the fire? And
Mm.
is it gasoline or kerosene? Is it bacteria or food toxicity? Is it mold or emotional stress? You have to identify what the trigger is that's causing the inflammation, pulling on the chain that's manifesting with the symptoms that you currently have.
Hmm. And so, speaking to that, or speaking to another part of the Pentagon about the infections or gut dysbiosis, I should say, my question there is what infections do you find commonly are associated with hair loss and thinning? And the reason I ask that is because, so after having a long conversation with you, I've somewhat changed my perception of things. And so typically, like when I help people with hair loss and thinning, I just automatically assume there's candida overgrowth, there's H. pylori, and whether they have that or not, what I'm able to provide to them as a protocol around that is not going to hurt them. And so I just want to give them that to see how far can we get in their healing, and what kind of results can we get for their hair. And so that's how I help myself. That's how I've helped a lot of people. But I'm seeing that there is a space for being able to at some point take a close look under a microscope and do some testing to see, like, has it fully been eradicated, not so much for the actual initial result but more so for the long-term longevity of this person who has been exposed to a lot of these pathogens that, if it's hair loss today and we didn't fully deal with it, it could be cancer tomorrow or something more serious, correct? And so my question to you is, okay, I've always assumed, SIBO, H. pylori, candida overgrowth. When you've done testing, have you found that there have been something besides that that has been common with people that are complaining to you about hair loss and thinning?
Oh, goodness, yes. Yeah. Just Google mold and hair loss. Here come the studies. I mean, food sensitivity and hair loss. Here come the studies. I mean, so it just depends on where the weak link in the chain is for you as an individual, and that's determined by your genetics and antecedents, how you live your life. You eat tuna fish 2, 3 times a week, you likely have mercury toxicity because most of the tuna is high in mercury. That's an antecedent, right? So it sets you up. So it's your genetics and how you live your life that determines where the weak link will be.
Yes. And so mold is something that we're talking a lot about on the summit. I had mold
Good.
toxicity. So we're even telling people what to do, how to find it, how to make their home less hospitable to mold. Food allergies come as a result of leaky gut, I would say, and then just the autoimmune dysfunction. So that's always something that's focused on. And then my question is, if we do enough gut healing work and make sure that the gut is not overly leaky and only leaky when it's supposed to be, is that enough to address food allergies if we do that and modulate the inflammation or the
Well,
inflammatory
you
or
see,
really the immune system?
right. Well, so one of the first tests that I do on every person is for a leaky gut to see how bad is it. And now we have a baseline, and 6 months or a year later, we will recheck when they're all better and everything's great, but we still have to recheck because if you don't recheck, and in 3 years, as you mentioned, you're diagnosed with cancer, did the practitioner do their job? They're called comorbidities. That there's one symptom that usually is in your face. That's the one that you want to deal with. But there are other symptoms in the background that can be a sleeper, but then will come up and just slam you and slam you hard. That's why there's an adage, in God we trust, all others require data. You need to know what you're working with, right? It's not just symptom relief. It's very important to have symptom relief, but I'm interested in the long term, And before we began, I had mentioned, but I'll say this now for all of your attendees. The average man lives to 78. The average woman lives to 83. But that's their total lifespan. But the average healthy lifespan, meaning without disease for men and women, is 62. That means that the last 16 years of a man's life and 21 years of a woman's life are with disabilities. That's the average. Total lifespan versus healthy lifespan. And Mrs. Patient, I don't know if I can extend your total lifespan. I don't know. But I sure as hell can extend your healthy lifespan. And the way you do that is by identifying where are the triggers of inflammation? What are the environmental triggers of inflammation that are causing this fire in my body, or is causing the immune system trying to protect me and creating all this inflammation? What is it? Is it stored glyphosate? Is it stored insecticides or heavy metals that are in my body already? And the answer for many people is yes. Yeah, you don't know how toxic you are. I mean, for young people today, as we were mentioning earlier, who want to have a family, you better do the total tox burden test before you ever get pregnant. Because don't you dare detox when you're pregnant. Don't you dare do that. But you learn to see, do I need to detox before you get pregnant? Because so many people are just loaded with so many toxic chemicals because of the world we're living in now compared to 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's a much more toxic world now.
And as far as toxicity is concerned, can you speak, just so we can put everything in context, can you speak a little bit to the audience as far as how a high toxic threshold would add to hair loss and thinning symptoms?
Oh, it creates the inflammation. The toxicity creates the inflammation, and the inflammation is pulling on the chain. And if your genetic vulnerability is your hair follicles, you lose your hair. I mean, it's that simple. It really is basic. It's always inflammation. Now, you may have a nutrient deficiency causing the inflammation. You may have an environmental exposure causing the inflammation. You may be in a toxic relationship and excess stress hormones causing the inflammation. There are so many different things that it could be. But when you understand, when you've got the paradigm, all right, I get it. I get it. It's inflammation. Okay. So where's my inflammation coming from? Well, that's the $1 million question. When you find that out, then you know what to do to fix the symptoms that you have.
You make it so simple.
Yeah, you think, I mean, it really is. I mean, and that's what I'm traveling the world teaching. I was in Rome 2 months ago, in London next month, and in India, and then back in the States. And practitioners sit there and their jaw drops. It's like, wait, can it be that simple? Well, that's how you think the big picture. Then there's so much detail as to how do you interpret these tests and what tests are good and which ones are old and not as accurate. So there's all of that our healthcare practitioners have to do the deep dive on. And that's where I come in and where I'm doing a lot of teaching. But first, you have to get them to understand this big picture. And you don't have to be a healthcare practitioner to understand the big picture. You just want to know, how inflamed am I right now? And what are the triggers of inflammation?
And so we'll jump a little bit more into the whole testing and which one is good and everything that we want to share about that, and also about the different phases of being symptomatic and how you could be brewing inflammation regardless of how you feel. But if someone's watching this, number one, I know that they might feel, oh gosh, like there's so much that is around me that could be a problem. How do I even begin to address that? And number two, of course, they'll probably be thinking, well, which are the right tests? So before we even get into the second question, can you give people a little bit of a landscape of what is the non-overwhelming way that they can, because you may have even written a book about this, what is a non-overwhelming way that someone is able to just mitigate their exposure and try to, I always have this analogy that I think I heard Barbara O'Neill say. She said when there's water running and there's a leak, or there's like a bunch of water on the floor in your kitchen because the faucet is open, what's the first thing you do? Do you start mopping or do you turn off the faucet? Clearly you turn off the faucet. And so in this example, that would be mitigating the exposure to toxicants on a day-to-day basis. That would be what's going to show up on the test result. And
That's
so
right.
let's talk about that so people have some practical takeaway tools or steps, when they listen to this.
It's overwhelming for people. I know it's overwhelming. I know. Uh, the secret to success, Mrs. Patient, you tell your family every Tuesday night after dinner or every Sunday after services, whenever it is, but every week, don't bother me for an hour. I'm going to learn a little more how we can be healthier as a family. And you allocate 1 hour a week. In my book, one of my books is called You Can Fix Your Brain. You can fix your brain. And it was number one in 7 categories on Amazon for brain functions. Very cool. And the subtitle of the book is just 1 hour a week to the best memory, productivity, and sleep you've ever had. But it's 1 hour a week. And in that book, there are 36 to dos. For example, when you learn that your leftover food sitting in a Tupperware container in the refrigerator, the next day, that food now has phthalates, the chemicals used to mold plastic, in the food because it leaches out of the containers. And you now in my book, you've got the 3 URLs to order glass storage containers. Miles Kimball, Amazon, and whatever the third one is, I don't remember. And oh, those are okay. Oh, I like those. And then you order 3 round ones and 2 square ones and one for the pie, and you pay with your credit card and hit send. It took an hour, but you're done for the week. But never again will you poison your family with minute amount of toxins that accumulate in their body, cause reproductive system problems and brain problems. Never again will they be poisoned. You give the Tupperware to your husband to store nails in the garage, right? And then next week, you go to the 3 URLs for organic makeup that doesn't have phthalates in it. And then next week, the organic phthalate-free nail polish, because you learn that you apply nail polish and the phthalates are in your bloodstream in 4 to 5 minutes when you apply it on your nails, that the phthalates go in. And then next week, you learn one more, and next week, one more. And in 6 months, you see a friend that you haven't seen for a while in a coffee shop, say, "Whoa, you look great. What happened to you?" Said, "Well, I found out that I changed my food storage containers. I've got different makeup. I got off gluten. I healed my leaky gut. I blah, 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 blah." And your friend just sits there and their mind is like, "Wait, what? What?" They can't fathom all of what you've just said, but you took it in bite-sized pieces. You took 1 hour a week. So you may go back and listen to the interviews on this hair loss summit for the next 2 months. Once a week, you're going to listen to another interview and go, "Oh, I forgot that he said that," right? And you're going to apply this principle. And the next week, you apply that principle. And you just take it a step at a time, a baby step at a time. And it won't take long before accumulatively you've put that inflammation to rest.
See, that again, simplifying everything. So they just have to go to your book. What was it called again?
You can fix your brain.
You can fix your brain. Yeah, and I have heard you speak about that book before, and I remember I did make a to-do list for myself. I didn't necessarily get the book, but based on what you said in the conversation, I made a to-do list for myself on what I needed to start doing, and little by little, I started implementing these things. And I think that people might make this assumption like, oh, something magical is supposed to happen when I just get rid of all these toxicants. And we've been indoctrinated to think for every ill, there's this pill, and meaning that there's a magic resolution to this one thing that you do. But what I want to caution the listener about, and what I want them to understand, is that it's not so much this magic thing that happens the minute you switch to plastic for glass. It's this resilience that you create for your body because of the fact that you are minimizing the insults that you're introducing to your body every day. And so what you may notice, but you won't really notice on the forefront, it might be something subconscious, is that the virus came into your home and everyone is puking but you, because you've taken that precaution to be more resilient because your immune system isn't suffering from all these things bombarding it. And that's just an example. Of course, if you're doing this for your whole family, then they'll all be protected, right? But it's just that you create this version of yourself that is less susceptible to the matriculation of diseases because you're just better equipped because you're protecting the bombarding. So that's what I
Yes.
wanted people to understand, and to support them in their quest to be more toxic free and have healthful living so that they can experience the benefits of that. Now, as far as testing is concerned, okay, I want to get into this special thing that we're doing for people who upgrade to VIP, which I'm super excited about. And I want to preface this introduction to what Dr. Tom and I are going to do for everyone who takes advantage of that, is that when people have hair loss and thinning, okay, I'm a woman, I've had hair loss and thinning. I understand that you guys are just desperate for relief. You want results yesterday because of how much you're suffering. And so I used to work in the pharmaceutical community, and I had a binder of labs, and I used to carry that around, and I had a table of contents, and I would show the doctors that were my friends, like, on page 33 my carbon dioxide was high, and on page 22 my progesterone was on the low end of normal. And I think that because of that, I kind of developed this ideology that if you follow the lab results and put everything in normal, which I did in that moment, I still didn't have the results with my hair. And so I focus a lot on the functionality of how hair grows. Can we remove any kind of debris or scar tissue or fibrosis or anything that's obstructing the hair from receiving blood? Is the blood oxygenated? Does the blood have nutrition? But Dr. Tom made a very important point to me for like an hour when we were talking about this, about how people actually go through different phases of developing chronic diseases. And so there is a phase, and I don't know if you want to talk about that now, Dr. Tom, where you cannot have symptoms, but still have very important um, susceptibilities to disease because of the fact that you are exposed to these toxicants and they're accumulating in your body. So you actually feel fine, but you're still brewing the possibility for autoimmunity. So when people come to me, they're already expressing quote unquote autoimmunity because they're coming to me with hair loss and shedding. And so we get that under control because I focus on these like common suspects, but without knowing on a test how much has been exposed of the human body, then we make ourselves more susceptible to that lack of resilience and symptoms coming back and developing something more serious if we don't go far enough. So I don't know if you've pulled up, Dr. Tom, what you want to show us, but I think it's important for them to understand that there's these different phases that people have to developing disease. And so while he's looking for that, I'll show everyone. Like I used to look like this, and and I I'm going to do a test. Dr. Tom is going to do labs on me, and he's going to see how high my level of toxicants are and how permeable my gut is. And so there's a certain level of healing that takes place by, yes, focusing on leaky gut, focusing on detoxification, focusing on balancing hormones, focusing on gut dysbiosis, focusing on modulating the immune system. So like all of those things are things that I've worked on. But at this point in my healing, if I don't look at my how many toxicants I have, then I could make myself more susceptible to diseases later on if I don't go far enough in my healing. And so I wanted to bring this up to everyone who's watching because I want you guys to understand that even though hair loss and thinning is what you're focused on and you're desperate to feel better and you just want it to go away, and yes, we can do that. If you only focus on that and you don't understand that this is just the beginning of something way more serious that can happen, and you don't also focus on making yourself just overall healthier, then that reoccurrence of the hair loss can be, something that's more prevalent and something more serious can happen. So being able to go deeper and allocating resources to focusing on that and managing that is important for your overall health and just being a version of you that doesn't develop more autoimmune conditions because once you have one, you can develop many more. So Dr. Tom, do you want to
Yeah,
take that?
right. That's a really nice summary. You actually do develop more. No one gets one autoimmune condition. They may be diagnosed with one autoimmune disease that's more prevalent, and that's the symptoms that took them in and they got a diagnosis. But if you check, there's always more autoimmune mechanisms going on that have not yet been diagnosed as a disease. It's really common. So there is this thing called the prodromal period, and that's really important to understand. So there are two studies I want to show you for that. So I'm going to share my screen here to show that to you. Let's see, that's this one. Is that right? Yeah, it's this one. Good. So we go here, and then I can pull this on full screen. So Melissa Arbuckle is a researcher. She published this paper over 20 years ago, and it changed the way doctors think. She went to the VA and she looked for people with lupus in the VA center. She found 136 people with lupus. And if they're in the VA center, it means they're veterans. They were in the armed forces. And what most people don't know is that when these people were healthy in the Army, Navy, Air Force, they had their blood taken many times, and for one reason or another. And the government's been saving and freezing almost all of that blood since 1978. Well, Dr. Arbuckle knew this. So she went to the VA and asked for permission to look at the blood of the currently diagnosed lupus patients when they were healthy in the Marines or in the Navy or the Air Force. She got permission, and this is what she found out. She found out that the antibodies to lupus, and there are 7 of them, they were there years before there was ever a symptom. They were elevated years before there was ever a symptom. And they followed a predictable course in getting worse. And she put this drawing together. These are the 7 antibodies of lupus, and the 0 line is normal levels, not no antibodies, but normal levels. And everything above means they're elevated. And by definition, when you have elevated antibodies, you're killing off more cells than you're making. And so this is a problem when you've got elevated antibodies to lupus here. And this was every single one of those antibodies were elevated 5 years before they ever had a symptom or had a diagnosis. And this was how they all together, they kept going up, going up, going up. Now they get symptoms and they go to a doctor because they have a clinical onset. They've got symptoms. And then within 6 months to a year, they get the diagnosis. But the mechanism has been going on for years beforehand. And she made up this drawing. First, you have a normal level of antibodies, and then you have elevated antibodies that she called benign because there's no symptoms. Then you get symptoms, and she called that pathogenic, and then you get diagnosed with a disease. But this mechanism is going on for 7 years, 10 years, 15 years before they ever have a symptom. And that is called the prodromal period. This is the period when the antibodies are elevated before you've killed off so much tissue that you now have symptoms. This is the easiest time to fix this. It's the easiest. So that prodromal period. Now, I want to show you something here. This is a study from Blue Cross Blue Shield that came out in February of 2020. And they said, and nobody paid attention to this because that's when the virus came out. But what they looked and said, we've got a problem here. We've got a real problem that in 4 years, the number of people with Alzheimer's has gone up by over 200%.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a problem. But during that same 4 year period, the number of people diagnosed with Alzheimer's between 30 and 44 years old went up by 407%.
Unbelievable.
It's happening younger and younger and younger. In a 4 year period, there was a 400% increase. Now, this is the last thing I want to show you. Back in 2017, some of you may remember that front page of most newspapers around the country, Medicare is going bankrupt. Alzheimer's is going to bankrupt Medicare. So the government put together a commission. They brought a commission together to study this, to figure out what to do. And 2 years later, they write this report, the Advisory Council. And in this report, they did this drawing. Now, this says it all. Remember, 407% increase in 30 to 44-year-olds. Here's the prodromal period. Remember prodromal, before symptoms, that Arbuckle talked about? There's 20 years of inflammation when there's no symptoms, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells, killing off brain cells. Then you get mild cognitive impairment. You walk out to the parking lot. Where did I park my car? What road is my car in? Where's my keys? And that goes on for another 7 years. So that's 25 to 30 years now of this inflammation in your brain, killing off tissue. Same concept, inflammation in your hair follicles, killing off tissue, and then you get the diagnosis. So that is the concept. There's a prodromal period. You need to identify the prodromal period before you get diagnosed with a disease. It's so much easier to fix. You can reverse most anything. Mrs. Patient, I don't know that I can increase your total lifespan. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? But I sure as hell can increase your healthy lifespan. I know that. And the way you do that is by reducing the inflammation that's pulling on the chain, manifesting at wherever your genetic weak link is. That's how you increase your healthy lifespan.
Wow. So if someone is doing testing with one of the labs that we're going to talk about now, and this thing that we're doing to help everyone who's watching, then what would that look like as far as a lab result is concerned? to identify if they're in the prodromal period or not, right? So I'm assuming
Yeah.
that, for example, me, I worked on my health to the point where, I don't have this anymore, right? Like that's
Yes.
gone, right? So I did that by focusing on my clinical intake and my history and just like what could it be that's around me? But I might be in the prodromal period now where I don't have symptoms, but I still have toxicant exposure. And if I ignore that long enough, then I'm still susceptible to something more serious. And now my husband and I'm 38 years old, so I know I've accumulated a lot of toxicants. I had mold in my home, I'm allergic to dust, all these other things, right? I want to have a baby. We're literally going to start trying in May. That's the plan. So the consequences of me not knowing this information and just assuming I'm fine because I regrew my hair is me potentially having a baby with illness. Is that correct, Dr. Tom?
That is exactly right. There are many studies that have come out now that show that baby's development in utero is heavily influenced by the health of dad's sperm and the health of mom's environment. And, for example, glyphosate levels for men at Fertility Center, they looked at the glyphosate level. It's 400% higher in the semen than in the man's blood, which means the glyphosate is accumulating in his testicles. And so the sperm he's producing may be damaged sperm. So
Mm.
that egg gets fertilized, baby develops, but baby can easily have IQ problems, poor brain development, poor neurological development. There are so many studies showing the influence of chemicals on baby's development. It's crucial, in my opinion, because of the toxicity of this world today. It's more crucial than ever that every single couple, before they get pregnant, test to make sure that their body is clean enough that your sperm is going to be healthy sperm, virile sperm, your eggs are healthy, vibrant eggs, and then the environment. I mentioned this to you earlier. I don't have any science for what I'm about to tell you, but I think the most sensitive tissue in the human body is a fertilized egg. It has no protection whatsoever. It's completely dependent on mom and mom's environment. So if mom is toxic with chemicals that have accumulated over a lifetime or heavy metals or any of that kind of stuff, then babies at risk. Baby's development is at risk. So I personally want every single couple to just test and make sure that they're starting with a full deck, that they're ready to go.
Hmm. Yeah, no. So basically, what's going to happen, you guys, is that I'm going to do this test. So you guys are going to see what prodromal periods could look like as far as someone being able to make symptoms go away, but not going deep enough. So we're going to see what that is. And then everyone who's watching this who orders the test as well will see my interpretation of the labs. So that's something that's included here. When you go ahead and do this test, you'll get a video where Dr. Tom is reading
I'll
through
go
my.
through every marker. I'll go through every marker. The ones that you have, we'll do those, and then I'll go through even the ones that are normal for you, so that people who have done the test say, "Oh, okay, so that's what this means." Okay, so that
Yeah.
you have a game plan. You understand what's next.
Okay, great. And so if people, and many of them will, watch the summit in its entirety, they will see some professionals saying a lot of these labs are inaccurate, which is one of the reasons why I haven't really been an advocate of doing lots of lab work. I'm not saying I wouldn't. I know how to read labs, but it's just that I feel like, you know, I, I don't want to have a test result that comes back it's negative and then it's not negative and then the
Right.
person's like, well, I don't want to do this because it didn't say, and then meanwhile I don't get the result for them, whereas if I give them that thing regardless of what the test result says, then they see the benefit, and so that doesn't hurt them. So to that point, Dr. Tom was telling me that he's been in the game for a long time, and there was a point where the lab results were less reliable, but now technology has changed and he knows which labs are a lot more reliable. And so maybe you can speak to that, and then after explaining that a little bit, you can share which ones you use and
Yeah,
where
yeah,
people can get
sure.
it.
And I'm going to use my phone as the example because I think
Okay.
it's a really good one. If I had met you, well, in 1990, I'm sure that would have been, in
I
any
was
event.
4.
Yeah, that's right. My son is 4 now, right? But
Aw.
you know, if I, s- but in about 30 years, I'm going to have this thing in my hand, a black thing, and there's no buttons on it or anything. I'm just going to run my hand across here a little bit, and I'm going to just see what I can pull up. And I can tell you within 10 seconds that the air particulate matter today in San Jose, California, is 64. Do not exercise outside today in San Jose. And in Canberra, Australia, it's 36. Good day to be outside. The air is clean for you today. In other words, I can tell you the air particulate matter anywhere in the world. I've got the encyclopedia of the world in my hand. I can tell you anything you want to know within 10 seconds, right? We take that for granted today. But if I had told you that in 1990, you would have thought I was watching too much Star Trek. Because we didn't have a paradigm that could understand that something like that was even possible. Science has improved. Laboratory science has improved. If you're using the tests that were designed in 1980, 1990, the early 2000s, you're 20 or 30 years behind the times. And those tests often have, it's called a sensitivity and specificity, meaning their accuracy, they're right 7 or 8 out of 10 times. It means they're completely wrong 2 or 3 out of 10 times, and you never know which ones they are. Well, technology now has improved. Mayo Clinic wrote the papers that I first read about. They called it a new era in laboratory medicine. And so now it's 97 to 99% accurate. So there's a 1, 2, 3% variance. That's acceptable. I can accept that. But 97 to 99% sensitivity and specificity is called silicone chip technology. They can look at 6,000 different markers in one blood draw. 6,000. It's like, wait, what? I mean, it's unheard of. It's
Yeah.
unheard of, but it's because they're looking at the DNA. They're much more comprehensive now than ever before in history. So these are the tests that, and I used to teach about the problems with tests in my talks around the world. Say, I'm sorry, guys, but there's no tests right now. And it was 2016 when this technology came out. And so we now have this technology. It's just a game changer.
And what's the name of the tests that you are recommending for this populace based on our
There's,
conversation?
yeah, there's 2 tests that we'll talk about. One is the total tox burden that looks at over 40, I think it's 45 different toxins in your body. Have they accumulated? And the other one is called the wheat zoomer because it identifies leaky gut and the gateway in the development of all disease. Remember, the perfect storm in the development of all disease is through a leaky gut. So those 2 tests give us a really good place to jump off from to get started.
Yeah. So essentially, if you have hair loss prematurely outside of the normal cadence, or you have thinning hair all over because there's been inflammation on your scalp and that suffocated your tissue, then you are basically going to show some kind of damage to your gut lining and a toxic threshold that is above normal. And so, whereas I would, I'm just normally I'm just assuming you have that and I'm going through a protocol to help you with that. But how do I know I did it long enough? How do I know, yes, your hair loss is better? You're so happy now, but how do I know you're not in that? What is the phase called?
Prodromal,
The prodromal
prodromal
phase, right?
period with comorbidities, with other
Right.
weak links in the chain.
Where you're still suffering from inflammation, but it's not developing in symptoms yet. And so you're still somewhat susceptible because we haven't helped you long enough. And so that's why right now we're putting together this opportunity for people that want to experience health, not just aging beautifully and reversing hair loss and thinning, but health to a level where you're like Dr. Tom, who has a 4-year-old, right? I mean, he's doing something right.
Yeah,
Right?
our goal is to extend healthy lifespan, closer to total lifespan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So just to recap, you guys, if you are wanting to take advantage of this, then we're going to provide a link for you guys. And when you go ahead and use that link to purchase the test, you will get a copy of the video where he's going over my results and he's explaining what someone can take away from that on their own test, despite what how they differ from my results. So he's going to go through every marker and explain, like, even though I'm normal in this area, if you're not, here's what that means. And so as far as understanding what these lab tests are showing you, you'll get that information from watching Dr. Tom's review of my test,
Perfect.
because Dr. Tom O'Brien is he's a world renowned. I mean, he's super famous. It's costs a lot of money to get his time, so it's really a big favor that he's doing for us. I mean, he teaches clinicians, so it's something we're doing to add value to the people that are seeing the value in it and wanting to know more about not just reversing hair loss, but just being overall healthier and making you less susceptible to a reoccurrence of hair loss, right? So that's the value in that. And yeah, so anything that I didn't ask you, Dr. Tom, that you wanted to talk about, or before I tell people where to find out more about you, or you can tell them that actually?
Oh, thank you. Um, eh, this concept of the perfect storm, if you spend some time to think about that, and just daydream about it a little bit and understand it, it gives you the frame to look at for the rest of your life and for you and your family of how to protect your health and maintain high quality health. It really is the big kahuna in identifying how to stay healthy. So it's the five factors, your genetics, the environmental triggers that have their hands on the dimmer switch of your genetics, dysbiosis, the too many bad guys, not enough good guys in the gut that creates the leaky gut, and the macromolecules go through into the bloodstream, and your immune system, trying to protect you, fights those macromolecules, and here comes the systemic inflammation. And the antibodies that you make to the macromolecules then mistakenly go after your brain or your hair follicles or your thyroid or your joints. It doesn't matter. It just depends on your genetics as to where it goes. When you understand that big picture concept, then every doctor that you talk to in the future, you have a base of understanding that they don't think from, and they're limited in one thing, and you may follow their recommendations, but you're also going to ask a couple more questions of them. Well, how does that relate to systemic inflammation? And they're going to wait, what? What did you ask? Right? So it's going to give you a confidence in taking care of yourself and your family for the rest of your life. That's the goal here. And my website is thedr.com, thedoctor.com. Just don't spell the word doctor out, thedr.com.
Okay, so we're gonna close, but I have this surprise question that I ask all of my speakers. And this question was designed to help you inspire the woman that's watching this right now, who is she's either already wearing wigs or she's looking at shopping, how much it is and shopping for wigs, and she feels defeated. She's so tired of trying, quote unquote, everything and nothing's working, and she's about to give up because she just thinks natural hair regrowth is not a possibility, even though all she wants is her hair back. She's not sure if she should believe she should keep fighting for it. So can you share a story of a moment in your life where you were faced with an incredible challenge? You looked at the situation and you said, I have no idea how I'm going to get through this, but that didn't matter as much as your reason for overcoming it. Like, results, they just came because your why was so strong, and somehow, some way, you made a miracle happen. So just share that story to help this person step into her personal power, because that's who she's going to have to be in order to understand, like, she's regrowing her hair or she's dying trying, because that's exactly what it's going to take for her.
Put one foot in front of the other. You may not know how to get to where you want to go, but we've all heard the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step, right? You just keep putting one foot in front of the other. And by listening to this event, focusing on your hair, you're going to get a whole lot of information, and a lot of people are going to say, this is the way to do it, or this is the way to do it. I'm suggesting that this is the way to think about it. When you think about it this way, then the next steps will become obvious. They'll fit right in. They'll fit right in for you. So just put one foot in front of the other.
Thank you for that. Oh, it's been so amazing to spend time with you and just have you be on the summit and share to this community that really needs your help and everyone's help. And to everyone who's watching, thank you for listening. We hope that you would take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity because I'm telling you, this man is so, I'm surprised I got this much time with him. Like he's so hard to get a hold of. And so to be able to have that kind of guidance, I'm telling you, it's going to be amazing. So especially with what we're putting together for you guys. So thank you everyone for watching. And we hope to see you at some of the other episodes. And thank you, Dr. Tom, for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Real pleasure to be with you.